I saw newsreels, and I saw the people in Madrid were under shelling and bombing. It was quite dramatic just to think that these people that we were just seeing in the newspapers, getting free and so on, suddenly being killed under such conditions. And I guess emotional reaction was, I want to help.
Los moros que trajo Franco en Madrid quieren entrar, mientras quieren milicianos, los moros no pasarán. Mientras quieren milicianos, los moros no pasarán. No pasarán, no pasarán.
The 1930s were a turbulent time. The preceding decades had witnessed World War, and workers' revolutions threatened long-standing power and privilege. It soon became apparent that the uneasy peace that followed World War I was beginning to unravel. A worldwide economic depression led to a massive rise in unemployment and a sharp decline in working conditions. Responses of governments varied, from forced labor camps to a near total militarization of both industry and society. The social and labor movements that brought hope to millions in the early part of the century were either being systematically dismantled or co-opted. Although most governments were oblivious to the threat, fascism was spreading throughout the Western world, led by the ideas of Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany. In this time of suffering and misery, it was Spain that would become a bright light, if only fleeting. Under the slogan, "No pasarán," they shall not pass, the Spanish people fought to stop the march of fascism in their country. They were joined by nearly 1,700 Canadians. One of them was Jules Paivio.
Mother was always, because we were so poor, would give the food over to the kids rather than eating it. Oh, I'm not hungry, you eat it. They took our kitchen stove, the storekeeper from there, because Father owed him $25 for groceries, and took our stove away. I can always remember that. We have to be that poor. We watched them cleaning out the stove and taking it away.
His father, a bushworker and a poet, Jules grew up in a small community near the city of Port Arthur, Ontario, the place later known as Thunder Bay.
It was a Finnish community, of course, Altpila at Kaministiko. Yeah, very active, like Finnish communities were at that time. There was 91 halls around Canada. About that time, there was lumber strikes all over Ontario, not just Thunder Bay area. We didn't like one teacher to have religious prayers in the morning. And we decided on our own to get the class together, all the school together, and we'll go on strike. So we pulled off the strike, we went out of the school and waited until she agreed that she won't have any more. You know,
and how old were you then?
Oh, we were already, probably 8 or 9 years old, yeah. That's a good time to start.
In 1929, the year world markets crashed, Finnish lumber workers and union organizers Viljo Rosva and Janne Voutilainen were allegedly murdered en route to organize a bush camp, only 10 miles from the Paivio home. Convinced that they were killed by company thugs, thousands joined what became the largest funeral procession in the history of Thunder Bay. As they were buried, a solar eclipse darkened the sky. That same year, Jules' father moved the family to Sudbury after he accepted a position as the editor of the socialist daily Vapos, meaning freedom.
We were second-class citizens, children of immigrants, you know. Even at school you got the term read. But because of our enthusiasm for what we were doing, those things didn't matter. We had a big Union Hall and great activities there. We had boxing training in there. The unemployed had pads to sleep on downstairs. They cooked in the kitchens of the hall and so on. They had a home there. I do recall the May Day parade we had in 1932, big May Day parade in Sudbury. And we had the big Ukrainians and the Finnish wrestling group were at the forefront. And they turned the water hoses on it. And I can always remember, you know, the big fellows, they could stand it and they just moved aside and waited. There was a small French activist and and he just went at the hoses, and it was, you know, I can always remember when those hoses hit him, he just just was thrown up, you know, and he'd get back out of there, and back he'd go, and again the hose, you know. Well, he landed in jail, of course, but it was quite a, you know, experience as youngsters. I was 12 years old at the time, yeah.
While social and labor movements were being suppressed in Canada and across the Western world, things were different in Spain. For one, the Socialist Popular Front had just won the 1936 election and was implementing modest reforms. Also significant was the role of the CNT, the million-strong anarcho-syndicalist National Workers' Confederation that was pushing for social revolution. They wanted direct democratic worker control of all industry and all facets of social and political life.
The Spanish people were finally getting away from the feudal conditions, with getting land ownership promised by the government. The anarchists, of course, went quite far, you know. They just went and grabbed land and factories.
El 18 de julio.
In the months leading up to the war, there was enormous tension between the left and the right in Spain. Political violence and assassinations were happening on both sides. Churches were being burned. It was a very charged atmosphere.
The church, of course, and the military, they were getting quite worried that it was getting out of hand.
Francisco Franco was one of the coup plotters. He was a Spanish general. He launched his revolt in Spain's colonial holdings in North Africa. And with the help of Hitler's Air Force, transported Franco's Army of Africa and Foreign Legion across the Strait of Gibraltar. And from there they made their advance north towards the capital of Madrid.
Although the Spanish generals expected a quick and easy victory, the Spanish people resisted. In the early days of the war, a lot of the fighting was done by militias, hastily organized by labor unions.
Often these were just workers with wagons full of burning bales of hay, poor rifles, poor shotguns, and the unions organized their own militias, and the government, after a delay, agreed to arm them.
Initially, the right-wing rebellion was put down in most of the major centers. Only after receiving aid from Hitler and Mussolini, with men, arms, and equipment, were the fascists able to gain a foothold. Although Germany and Italy were backing General Franco's coup d'etat, the League of Nations adopted a policy of non-intervention.
You really wondered how they would put on non-intervention against a democratically elected Republican government in Spain. The democracies where you thought would fight fascism, they knew what was happening to the Jews in Germany already. There was a socialist government in France, but that didn't seem to help. Fascism was the threat, and the ruling class in our own countries, Britain and France, feeling that yes, fascism is a good thing. They thought Mussolini, trains went on time and so on, was a wonderful thing. That so if a few communists and trade unionists were killed in the process, so what? Spain wasn't worth trying to defend, and as a matter of fact, I guess they felt that it may be a threat to Britain and France if Spain went too far left.
In defiance of non-intervention, some 40,000 internationals from 53 countries secretly flooded into Spain to take up the cause of the Spanish people. Nearly 80% of the Canadian volunteers were immigrants, and a disproportionate amount were Finns. Of the volunteers from Northern Ontario, over 100 were Finnish.
Then I heard that two of the Finns from Sudbury were going there or had gone. It was so hush-hush that I didn't even know. I had seen them, one at the Vapos, with father around, and oh no, where's he gone? Nobody said where he's gone. So then I arranged to start heading for there, sold my few belongings, and left Sudbury quietly. And I guess in Father's poem is the story of the leave-taking at the cabin. Father was sickly and Mother was not well. And when I said my goodbyes there, and I'm off to Spain.
Goodbye, Dad. I'm on my way to Spain.
So sudden, so unexpected, it hits like hail from the sky. I struggle, hesitate, have difficulty finding words. Have you considered this serious matter? Look, from such wars you do not return.
I have considered, Dad, and decided so.
A hard, firm handshake, yet you disappear into the wintry darkness. I slowly into the cabin stagger. Such contradictory emotions seethe through me. Pride in a son who does not fear, who wants to fight for right. That feeling strengthens, inspires me. A son's loss, a life so young, perhaps forever, that presses down on me in gloom.
I didn't know what I was going into. All I wanted to do was go and help those people that I didn't know very well. I felt, well, what's in it for me? I couldn't go on to school. I had been recommended, but no scholarships to go on to university. So I had the chance to go quietly and do what I thought was right. Really nothing glorious about it. We got the Ile-de-France then, and I guess there was about 100 of us on the boat.
And they were told to keep things hush-hush, you know, they didn't want to, because officially Canadians were not supposed to be fighting in Spain. Often they had passports that were stamped not valid for travel in Spain. So they generally were told some story that they were visiting relatives in Europe or they were going to the World Fair in Paris.
You know, they knew quite well with shabby $2 suitcases and so on that we weren't going to any World Fair, but that was our story.
In some cases, a diplomat, an American diplomat, would meet the boat and say the border to Spain is closed, you should all turn back.
And told us that, well, you can't go to Spain now, there's non-intervention is in effect, and we'll help you to get back to America. Just move over and give us your names and everything will be all right. Well, dead silence, and they went off, I guess in a huff, and we went on to Paris.
So what would happen is the Canadians would have a few days in Paris, and you can imagine Paris in the 1930s, a lot of these volunteers were from rural communities, and the City of Lights overwhelmed them, but they caught on quickly, some of them. And they'd have a few days in Paris, and then they'd be transported to the Spanish frontier. And typically, they would have to climb the Pyrenees Mountains.
We met the guide. We're in low shoes. We started going up the higher, narrow paths with gorges on the sides, and there was some blizzard. So as soon as the border guards went off into the away, then we went across on the top of the mountain and back down the other side. Very steep down below, but we got through. As we got into Barcelona, people came with oranges and dumping oranges into the railroad cars. There was an exuberance there that they had put down, you know, the differences and the fascist rebellion in Barcelona. It was quite intense in Barcelona, as a matter of fact. We did go to one of the nightclubs there. That was quite vital to the city, you know, the nightlife was good there. And so we got a taste of the real Spanish city that was still, you know, very open and so on. It wasn't getting bombed right then yet. And then we went south to Albacete, where the International Brigades headquarters was located. So then we went into training in a small town.
Early Canadian volunteers were placed in the English-speaking 15th Brigade of the Spanish Republican Army. Canadian volunteers formed sections within the American Abraham Lincoln and George Washington battalions. Some were placed in European units based on the languages they spoke.
The Canadians, we have quite a few of unemployed British stock and so on from British Columbia, and immigrants, Finns, Thunder Bay, so on, and Sudbury, Toronto. The Hungarians, there's a lot of Hungarians that were older. Some had been in the war before, but these immigrants had come in the 1920s. They were class conscious. They knew what the issue was, so they volunteered to come to Spain.
About 75% of them were communists, belonged to the Communist Party. Although what emerges in these documents that have been released from the Comintern archives is many of them were not particularly dogmatic communists. You often get comments from their commanders and their commissars in Spain saying things like, the Canadians are very good soldiers, they're very brave, but they are politically undeveloped, or they have anarchist tendencies, that sort of thing.
They were of many nationalities. Americans were from trade unions and the Communist Party, YCL. I was an anti-fascist and became a strong anti-fascist, but I was fighting against the ruling class.
because they were very transient, they would go back and forth across the country looking for work. Many of them never really developed the kind of Communist Party dogma that their American counterparts did. And again, this caused some problems in Spain. You have these exasperated notes in the archives from their commanders and their commissars saying that the Canadians don't understand that the authority of the People's Front is an authority that they should be working to build up, as opposed to the authority of the system back in Canada that they were used to rebelling against.
Training, it was minimal. We had some of the old Ross rifles, the Canadian Ross rifles that somebody had bought, and they were being used by our battalion. And where the bolt, would shoot back, slip and shoot back and knock you on the. So they weren't very good, but we got some rifle training, a little bit of grenade training, and off to the front.
With the little training they had, they were rushed to defend Madrid.
So then we were sent to the front, to the Jarama front, where the big battles and the fascists were encircling Madrid. And they were just about closing the pincers around. The British, they lost half their men in the first battles there. And the Lincolns, quite a few too. We lost quite a few. So anyway, we stopped the advance there, and it stayed that way right to the end of the war pretty well at that front.
Tässä lokarin lännen riisukossa olen kulkenut vaikka missä. Olen käynyt Piuttissa, Loutissa, Retlaatsissa, Miamiissa.
I think the Finnish Canadians were a very effective force in the International Brigades. Sudbury area, Timmins, most of them from Thunder Bay area. Some of them went into the partisans fighting behind the lines, and 2 or 3 of them were excellent people in that job.
The Finnish Canadians stood out in some ways from the other international volunteers. They had a reputation for bravery.
So the machine gun company, very good men and good, strong Finnish guys could carry the sections of the heavy Russian machine gun.
For example, when the retreat started, when the Nationalists launched their major offensive in March 1938, and Finnish Canadians were manning a machine gun post, and they became cut off.
One machine gun post just kept on firing, and right to the last when they were surrounded.
But they didn't receive orders to retreat and refused to do so, and were eventually surrounded and killed on capture. We found out later on. Niilo Mäkelä, Canadian Finn, was one of the most respected and best loved commanders in Spain. He commanded the Mackenzie-Papineau's machine gun company, and his men described him. They said he never tried to ingratiate himself to the men. He was their leader, and he played that role. But he was very brave. I remember one volunteer said, when they were being in battle, he'd never pay attention to the planes that were strafing them. He would just look at the enemy in front of them, and this one of them respected his men, and he was fatally wounded during the retreats of March 1938. And his men, in the course of this chaotic retreat, when they got a little bit of breathing space, they put up a plaque and named a square in a small village after him.
So they were tremendous fighters, anti-fascists in Spain.
Vaikka maailman mystit meitä tuutittaa, niin vapaus se varmasti voittaa.
After a successful but costly defense of Madrid, the 15th International Brigade went on the offensive at Brunetti.
The Brunetti offensive, that's where I really learned about what a war is like, So we tried to capture the first Villanueva de la Cañada, our brigade. We were bogged down. We were trying to go through open plains into the town, and they had phalanges well fortified in the church tower and so on. They could fire right down at us. And so we dug in hastily, foxholes, and as fast as you could. So we didn't get into the action there until right at nightfall. We were there all day under the hot sun. And the fascist troops, they came out of the town finally, and they had the peasants and the townspeople ahead of them. And we couldn't fire at them. We thought, well, we'd hit the townspeople. And so they were firing at us. And so they finally had to fire. I know I didn't there, but other troops from the coming, I think the British or Dimitrov, they had to finally fire because they were getting killed. So I can always remember going out of there and marching through with these dead bodies of the civilians, the peasants, and so on. So this is war,
The next day, the 15th Brigade would begin their assault on Mosquito Ridge, a looming crest bristling with fascist machine guns.
We had about 4 tanks when we went off into battle attacking. And I went behind the tank. The tank got caught down in a ravine under fire, and so I had to run back up the hillside. And I don't know how I always survived, whether we're going over the top or anything. I'm fast. And I'd run back and through the bushes, and I got back. And the funny thing that happened, I got back where shallow trenches they had dug, or the foxholes, and I dived in there, and about the same time, a Japanese American got a bullet straight through his head. These are incidents, that happen, that are kind of strange happenings. And me, not a scratch.
After an unsuccessful attempt to take the ridge, the Lincoln and Washington battalions were pulled off the line. They had taken heavy casualties. The brigade had gone into Brunetti with over 2,000 men. Days later, less than 900 remained on their feet. Both the Lincoln and Washington battalions lost almost half their numbers. They were combined into one unit, and the Washington battalion was decommissioned.
So that didn't work out. We just didn't have the Air Force, artillery, very few tanks. Yeah.
On the march to the rear, the Lincolns were caught in the open by fascist heavy bombers.
We had to go from one section of the front to the other, no sleep and so on. We were under a heavy bombardment in a small section there. Others observing that, I read afterwards, they thought, how did anybody survive there? Out of our own company, there was only 6 guys killed. And here I was holding on to the grass with the bombing.
Immediately after the bombing raid, the Lincolns were attacked by several thousand Moorish troops backed by Italian tanks. Despite having almost no time to prepare their defense, the battle was a decisive victory for the Canadians, thanks in great part to the machine gun company. Since arriving in Spain, Canadian volunteers had lobbied for their own unit. On July 1st, 1937, the Canadians, along with some Spaniards and Americans, were reorganized into the Mackenzie-Papineau Bataljon. The MacPaps derived their name from the leaders of the 1837 rebellions against British colonial rule in Canada.
I came back from the front at the end of July, and I stayed with Neil O'Mekela, one of the commanders, company commander there, and when they were in training. And so I watched their training. They were getting very good training. I thought, well, oh my gosh, my 3 weeks. And here they're getting such good training, and with better arms. They had Maxim machine guns. They had the Czech light machine guns, very nice light weapon.
While some veterans of Jarama and Brunetti returned home, Jules was selected for officer training. Jules was assigned to train new recruits, while the MacPaps went on to fight at Fuentes del Ebro, Teruel, and Segura de los Baños. When the fascists tried to cut the lifeline connecting Barcelona and Madrid, Jules was rushed back to the front. This time became known as the Retreats. Only 20 years old, Jules was made adjutant of the machine gun company.
I can remember marching. We had to march all through the night down to another section at the front because the lines were being broken. We were retreating there week after week, and so the company commander he went to sleep, and I had a couple of sections that I had to place up on the olive groves there, and this is where we'll form our lines. And then I was placing this machine gun. So I got them into position, and they were setting up the gun, and a couple of soldiers with helmets came over from the left through the olive grove. Then and so I thought, okay, I'll walk over, and I got right up to them, and all I had was a hand grenade. I didn't have a revolver or anything, and they suddenly put the rifles to me, and Manos Arriba suddenly realized these were Italians. So I was being captured, so I yelled to them just behind me that tira, son fascistas. But darn it, they were just open mouth looking while I was being, they could have killed those guys, but they were, young Spaniards, and they didn't realize. If they had been battle-hardened Canadians, for instance, there, or Finns, they'd have shot them there, and I would have got away. So anyway, they slowly backed me off farther back, and because I had yelled "Tiras son fascistas," they pummeled me around with rifle butts, but half-heartedly. The corporal was a little meaner and tried to beat me more. At the same time, a scouting party had been captured to the right of me with this Karl Geiser, political commissar, at the head of it, about 15 men. And so I was put with them and brought us back to the whatever divisional headquarters at a farmhouse. In a few minutes, or about an hour later, suddenly a big hullabaloo, and we were lined up against a brick farm wall there. And of course, they had intended to execute us anyway. So the firing squad came out, ready to call the order So anyway, this is where you know that this is the end, and it's quite an experience. Suddenly there came a limousine, anyway, with the Italian general of some kind, officer, came with motorcycles in front and motorcycles at the rear, so he must have been a high officer. He stopped, well, what's happening here? And so the officer said, oh, we're just gonna kill the Rojos here. And he said, oh no, we have agreed to capture for 30 days the internationals for Italian prisoners. Anyway, so that was stopped, and we were saved.
Following this brush with death, Jules spent the next year in a Spanish concentration camp.
despite the deprivation and so on, and being in a concentration camp, and half starving, teeth falling out. Gee, I remember Tex, one of the Americans, his teeth fell out. Mine didn't. If the little stone went into one of my teeth, it just went right in. Scurvy. But the spirit of the Germans, the Austrian, the anti-fascists there, who knew that they had no hope of getting out of there, very little hope of getting out of there alive. The Christmas, concert that we put on, tremendous, right through life. I have found that. People that you're with, the strong people, Carl Geiser, when you have somebody like that beside you, you're strong. Nothing matters. You do what has to be done.
Ironically, being captured may have just saved Jules's life. In the following days, the International Brigades were driven back across the Ebro River and eventually all the way south to the sea. Many Canadians died in the retreats and in the futile attempts to push back the fascist advance. Madrid was cut off, and in September 1938, a grateful Spanish Republican government sent the International Brigades home. Within 9 months, both Barcelona and Madrid fell into fascist hands, ending the Spanish Civil War. 3 months later, using tactics perfected on Spanish soil, Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, and the Second World War began. General Francisco Franco's dictatorship didn't end until his death in 1975. Jules went on to serve in the Canadian Army in World War II as a topographic map instructor. He remained an activist all his life and later studied to be an architect. He spent his career designing houses, schools, and libraries, and taught as a professor at Ryerson University in Toronto.
After that, the RCMP were a nuisance, I'm telling you. After I came back, they were hounding me for weeks on end. It was my wife. I got married, and she was just petrified with that. And I've tried to calm her that this is the way it's going to be. That's the kind of guy I am. He'll have to get used to it.
Mr. Baudry, I now have the honor and privilege on behalf of the Association of Veterans and Friends, Mackenzie-Papineau Bataljon, International Brigades in Spain, to donate this monument to the National Capital Commission to be held in permanent trust for the Canadian people. Thank you.
That Second World War was not necessary. They could have been stopped right then. Germany was rearming feverishly, but it wasn't that strong. France, unfortunately, the Maginot Line wasn't a proper kind of defense, but they had a strong army. Britain could build air force as it did very, very quickly. And so they would have stopped Germany before it got any further. Now, you can't speculate how it would have happened, but they still wanted a war against the Soviet Union, the ruling class.